This guy attempted to mail himself around the world in a crate and paid the ultimate price. This woman became famous due to something unbelievably weird lurking between her legs. This man was somehow both a dwarf and a giant, and this fella was raised by wolves. How the heck is any of this true? Well, let's find out. Alongside uncovering the very disturbing secret this woman kept locked in her attic and more insanity as we explore stories that sound fake but are 100% real. In 1965, not long after 19-year-old Brian Robeson left his home in Wales for Australia, he decided life down under wasn't for him. Unfortunately, earning very little, Brian couldn't afford a plane ticket back home, meaning he had to get creative. Too creative, if you ask me. In a first attempt at freedom, Brian snuck aboard a ship bound for London. He used a visitor's pass to get on board and hid in the cargo hold until they set sail. And despite a promising start, several hours into the voyage, Brian became violently seasick and was forced to seek the medical bay. As soon as his ruse was discovered, the crew escorted him off the boat and abandoned him in New Zealand. But Brian wasn't stranded for long. He secured some minor financial help from a relative in Australia, just enough to fly him back to Sydney, but not enough to get him back to the UK. On his return to Australia, he found himself coming up with a brand new plan, even riskier than the first. Inspired by Reg Spears, the man who successfully mailed himself from London to Perth the year before, Brian decided traveling by crate on the postal service was the way to go. Brian planned on sending himself via cash on delivery, meaning he only had to worry about settling fees once back in London. Using forged company papers he got from a friend, Brian convinced Qantas Airlines that the crate would be carrying a large IBM 7030 computer being shipped to London for servicing. With his transport all set, Brian bought a crate from a builder's merchant. At 30 by 26 by 38 inches, it wasn't much bigger than the box of a standard front-loading washing machine. Quite the tight fit. The side of the box Brian climbed in was nailed shut from the inside once he was in, and he packed a pair of pliers to open it back up when he touched down in London. Because Brian also took a large suitcase with him, it meant he had to sit with his knees pressed against his chest for the entire 36-hour journey. He couldn't stretch his legs and couldn't turn around. And even though the 2 pillows he packed made it comfy at first, he wouldn't stay comfy for long. On the 17th of May, with only a torch and 2 bottles to hand, one for water and the other for nature's emergencies, Brian's starting leg from Melbourne to Sydney began. He managed to smuggle himself on the plane just fine, but things quickly started to go wrong. At first, Brian's box was dumped upside down, but as he was helplessly strapped in, try as he might, he was crammed too tightly in the box to turn around. His neck soon started to throb and blood rushed to his head. Before long, he was in so much pain he found himself continuously blacking out. Eventually, after spending 22 hours upside down, Brian's crate was turned upright and loaded onto another aircraft. But his problems didn't end there. What Brian didn't know was that the original Qantas flight ended up being overbooked, so the airline loaded him onto a Pan American aircraft with a longer flight route. This might have been okay, but with the cargo hold not being heated, Brian's situation became increasingly serious. From breathing difficulties to pain in his elbows and knees, his entire body was in absolute torture. Throughout the flight, Brian kept slipping in and out of consciousness, tormented by the nightmare of his crate being thrown out of the plane. By the time they touched down, Brian was in such pain he could barely find the strength to check the time on his watch. He did manage to turn on his torch, but it proved too heavy in his weakened state, and he dropped it out of reach. When the flight was over, a worker saw the torch's light and decided to investigate. Peering through a hole in the crate, he was shocked to see what looked like a dead body. The worker immediately summoned a team of doctors and customs officers who, after a heated debate about the crate's legal status, decided to break it open. Finally, Brian's ordeal was over. He had escaped Australia, but here's the kicker. He wasn't in London either. The startled officials, all of whom spoke with American accents, revealed, to Brian's horror, he was in fact in Los Angeles, nearly halfway across the world from his intended destination. It took a total total of 4 officials to hoist Brian up and out of the crate, and as they laid him down, his legs refused to straighten. For hours, he was stuck in the position he'd wedged himself into for his journey. Still, the officials got him to the hospital, and Brian's story quickly gained the attention of the media. He also gained the attention of the FBI, who initially thought he was either a spy or that he'd been kidnapped. Having explained to them that neither of those accusations were true, the question remained about what to do with him. Luckily, the American authorities decided not to press any charges. But that didn't mean Brian was scot-free. Being named responsible for his fate as a stowaway, Pan American could have easily sent Brian back to Australia. But keen to ride the wave of publicity, they sent him to London instead, first class, and in an actual seat this time. Whilst the exact time is debated, it's thought Brian stayed in the cramped box for at least 100 hours during his ordeal. Let's move on to something even more perplexing now. Josephine Myrtle Corbin was a normal girl by most standards. She was born on May 12, 1868 in Lincoln County, Tennessee. Only, did I forget to mention that Myrtle Corbin had 4 legs? This mutation gave her one of the strangest overall anatomies of all time, for more reasons than you'd think, and in turn, one of the most unusual lives ever. When Myrtle was delivered, her parents could hardly believe their eyes. Although the little girl was perfectly formed from her head down to her navel, a tiny second pair of legs lay flat against her belly. Her 2 inner legs, although capable of some movement, were underdeveloped. Later, it would be determined that she had actually been born with an incredibly rare condition known as dipygus. Myrtle's body axis had forked left and right partway along the lower spinal column during fetal development, meaning her legs and pelvis had been duplicated. With 2 pelvises side by side, Myrtle naturally had 2 sets of legs, each consisting of 1 fully formed leg and 1 small leg, with just 3 toes. Although Myrtle was able to move her smaller legs, they weren't strong enough for her to walk on, and weren't long enough to reach the ground anyway. Meanwhile, one of her larger legs had a clubbed foot, so ironically, the so-called 4-legged girl only really had 1 fully functioning leg to speak of. As she grew up, it became apparent that she also had some pretty crazy stuff going on downstairs too, but we'll get to that in a moment. Myrtle's condition may have made her a strange outlier in her small hometown, but little did she know, the very thing that might have held her back could also make her a star. From the moment Myrtle turned just 5 weeks old, her father decided to market her as a walking, talking moneymaker for the family. After showing off his 4-legged daughter to curious neighbors and charging them a dime each, Mr. Corbin started placing ads in local newspapers to attract people from far and wide. Over the next decade or so, William Corbin would take his little girl all over the country, where she was exhibited at fairs, sideshows, and so-called dime museums. When Myrtle turned 13 in 1881, the newspaper ads Myrtle's father had posted attracted famous circus owner P.T. Barnum, and she was promptly signed for the Barnum and Bailey Tour's sideshow circuit under the moniker the 4-legged girl from Texas. One of Myrtle's very first promotional pamphlets described her as being as gentle of disposition as the summer sunshine and as happy as the day is long. When Myrtle first took to the stage, nothing gave away her unusual condition, apart from her particularly wide hips and clubbed foot. But when Myrtle lifted her gown to reveal what lay beneath, the whole audience was left speechless. Myrtle continued to work for P.T. Barnum for 4 years, and people were so keen to catch a glimpse that Myrtle was able to secure herself an unusually high contract of up to $250 a week. By the time she turned 18, Myrtle had raked in enough dough to be able to retire from the spotlight for the time being. Myrtle's younger sister had married a man named Hiram Locke Bicknell in November 1884, and Hiram's younger brother Clinton became interested in Myrtle. The pair married the following year. Myrtle's marriage brought an early end to her sideshow career, much to the chagrin of circus owners up and down the country. In the years that followed, despite some initial complications, Myrtle amazingly became the mother of 5 healthy children. Thanks to a rare deformity, she had 2 uteruses and ultimately carried 3 pregnancies on the right side and 2 on the left. Myrtle also had 2 distinct sets of fully functioning bowels. Each part worked totally entirely independently from each other, so hypothetically speaking, Myrtle could suffer a bout of diarrhea on one side while simultaneously battling constipation on the other, which sounds far from ideal. Besides her continuing presence in medical literature in the United States and around the world, Myrtle maintained a quiet existence with her husband and children. But when her children reached adulthood and funds started running low, Myrtle's showbiz career experienced a fleeting revival around 1909. She dusted off her best dresses and began exhibiting herself at Huber's Museum in New York at the age of 41 under the new moniker The Four-Legged Girl from Cleburne. Though it had been more than 20 years since she'd set foot on the stage, within no time, she was making $450 a week, which was a killing back in the day. As the years drew by, Myrtle began to retire from show business. Then, in 1928, 1 week shy of turning 60, she sadly passed away from an infection. Four-legged folks living as long as Myrtle are basically non-existent in recent history. But if any modern four-legged folks are watching, like the lady in the Photoshop my designer has so kindly crafted here, drop a comment below and we may feature you in the next episode. But on that multi-limbed topic, is the highest number of toes ever recorded on a person more or less than 16? Well, to find out, you'll have to buy our game Nuh-uh. Only joking. The record's held by Akshat Saxena with 20 toes total, 10 on each foot. If you found that interesting, you'll love our trivia game. It's full of all of our most interesting facts. Click the link in the description or on screen now to order your copy today. Now let's explore another absolutely mind-blowing medical anomaly of humankind. The Guinness Book of World Records has recognized countless world's tallest and world's smallest individuals over the years, but only one man has ever found himself eligible for both categories in a single lifetime, Mr. Adam Rayner. Adam was born in the city of Graz, Austria in 1899, to parents who were both of average height. His father was 5'6" and his mother was 5'4". As he grew up, it soon became apparent that Adam wasn't developing at the same rate as most kids. At age 16, Adam stood a mere 4'6" tall. When he turned 19, Adam stood at a remarkably short 4'8.3". His new height meant he could officially be classified as a dwarf, which is by definition any adult who is less than 4'10" tall. Little did Adam know, not only would he grow the extra 2 inches needed to be classified as average height, he would eventually skyrocket into another realm entirely, gianthood. Things started to get stranger when Adam's peers noticed something. Adam's hands and feet were rapidly becoming abnormally large. At age 19, Adam was already wearing shoes size 10, which seemed totally disproportionate to the rest of his body. Just 3 years later, his feet had already expanded to a US size 20. For some perspective regarding how large that really is, Shaquille O'Neal wears shoes sized US 22, and he's over 7 feet tall. When you consider the fact that Adam's height remained relatively static during this time, it probably looked like he was wearing clown shoes. As he made his way through his 20s, Adam's entire body suddenly started growing at an alarming rate, unlike anything anyone could have anticipated. By the time he reached 33, he had grown to a shocking 7 foot 1 inches. Around the same time, he started to develop a severe curvature of the spine, an ailment that would burden him for the rest of his life. But what had caused this man to transform from a so-called dwarf into a towering giant in the space of just a decade? Doctors began to suspect that Adam may have developed a specific kind of tumor that caused an extreme case of acromegaly. This rare hormonal disorder is generally caused when the pituitary gland starts to produce too much human growth hormone, or HGH. Besides having an immense effect on growth height-wise, acromegaly also impacts hand and feet size, which explains Adam's bizarre proportions before the rest of his body had a chance to catch up. In addition to his towering height, Adam's face had also become elongated due to a protruding forehead and jaw. Meanwhile, his lips had become thicker and his teeth more widely spaced, all common symptoms of acromegaly. The risky operation to remove the offending tumor went ahead on the 2nd of December, 1930. And unfortunately, while the tumor was successfully removed, it didn't entirely work. Adam continued to grow, albeit at a slower rate, with his spine's curvature worsening worsening considerably. As the years drew on, his hearing and eyesight worsened too, leaving him half deaf and blind, among an array of other serious health-related issues. Sadly, Adam died on the 4th of March, 1950 in Vienna at just 51 years old. When he was last measured before his death, Adam Rayner measured a staggering 7 foot 8 inches tall. This incredible, albeit troublesome feat makes him the only person in history to be considered both a dwarf and a giant in the space of just one lifetime. Let's move on to something truly wild now. You might have heard of cats growing up among dogs, taking on some canine behaviors.
What the hell is this?
But our world is home to a phenomenon much stranger: human beings raised by animals, and subsequently taking on their animalistic traits. It sounds crazy, but it does happen. And I'm about to show you some of the most remarkable examples ever recorded. In the late 1910s, a 2-year-old boy from a village in Assam, northeastern India, was taken off into the jungle by a leopard. With leopards' man-eater reputations, the child was assumed dead, until 3 years later, when a hunter killed a leopard mother close to the village. Alongside the dead leopardess were 2 leopard cubs and a 5-year-old human boy, the same one taken 3 years earlier. The boy was returned to his parents, who had kept a careful watch, as whenever he was startled, he'd run off into the jungle on all fours. He refused to share his father's hut and had to be tied to a pole in the grass outside, as it was the only place where he would actually sleep. He also had an extremely well-developed sense of smell and used it to seek out small animals and village chickens, which he would tear to pieces and eat with disturbing speed. Like so many feral children, however, he was aggressive and struggled with socialization. When he was first brought back to the village, the leopard boy bit and attacked every human he came into contact with, but grew accustomed to people over time. It was even recorded that he eventually got married, all while continuing to catch, kill, and devour small animals on a regular basis. But I guess every husband has their own weird hobby. On to something more recent now. When medical staff at a Moscow clinic brought in a new patient in December 2007, he was the strangest they'd ever seen. The boy, no older than 10, had been found living among a pack of wolves in the forests of Russia's Kaluga region. His toenails were extremely long, he was filthy, and proved an awful guest. He would snarl and bite at staff with reportedly sharp teeth. Though the boy appeared intelligent, he couldn't speak, suggesting he'd lived among the wolves since early childhood. Unfortunately, that's about all the information we're about to gain, because running on all fours, he escaped days later and was never recaptured. But he wasn't the first feral child allegedly raised by wolves. Other cases popped up on local records in India during the 19th century, although one particular instance from the mid-20th century in Spain is arguably the most fascinating of all. In 1954, at the age of 7, Marcos Rodriguez Pantojas' father sold him to a goat herd in Spain's Sierra Morena mountain ranges to serve as essentially a slave. After his master died, however, Marcos was able to survive in the wilderness, learning what to eat by watching animals. For instance, Marcos would let wild boar snuff out root vegetables under the soil and steal them before they had a chance to tuck in. According to his own account, along his journey, Marcos found himself in a cave occupied by some wolf cubs. Young and naive, he fell asleep in the den, only to be woken when the aggressive-seeming mother returned. But after feeding her pups, the wolf mother gave Marcos a piece of meat he tucked in, and she began to lick him. Their newly formed bond lasted until he was found by the Spanish Civil Guard in 1965. After 11 years in solitude, he was returned to civilization, howling and biting like a wolf. Though he initially despised city life in Madrid, where he was interned at a clinic, he eventually grew accustomed to human life. For years, he insisted on sleeping on the floor instead of a bed because it felt more familiar. But as time passed, he found employment in farm work and is now retired, having been fully integrated into society. He plays harmonica and likes to drink at the local bar like a regular guy. But Marcos has stated human life will never be as meaningful for him as life among the wolves, and if he was younger, he'd return to the mountains. Our next unbelievable individual is Oksana Malaya, who was born in 1983 in the Russian village of Nova Lyudmila Blagoveschenka to severely alcoholic parents. Neglected almost entirely, as a 3-year-old child, Oksana was locked out of the family home and had no choice but to seek shelter in an old dog kennel near the house. For 5 years, Oksana lived among the dogs, sharing scraps, only returning into the family home on the rare instance the opportunity arose. When her situation was finally uncovered by the authorities, the dogs put up a fight as carers took her away, clearly seeing her as part of the pack. Oksana was transferred to a foster home for mentally handicapped children, where they began to study the impact of the previous 5 years. Oksana behaved exactly like a dog in every regard, from movement to eating and grooming habits. Amazingly, after years of specialized therapy and education, she was able to speak fluently and intelligently. While her intellectual level would still be considered handicapped, she now makes a living milking cows and even occasionally appears in Ukrainian TV interviews. But cases of feral children get much stranger, as you're about to see. In the late 1950s, in the Indian village of Baragdava, a mother watched in horror as her 1-year-old son fell into the river Quano and was swept away. But in 1973, a local priest walking alongside the river on the outskirts of the village spotted a young boy covered from head to toe in the river's filth, catching fish and eating it raw. More people soon began reporting sightings of the strange child, including the mother who'd lost her boy years ago. Upon seeing him asleep on the riverbank, she allegedly noted a birthmark identical to the one her son had. But whether it was her son or not, the amphibian boy was captured and brought back to the village. His skin was calloused, with a notable green hue, possibly from the various algae of the river. He couldn't walk particularly well and appeared to be deaf, but he fled before more details could be confirmed. He spent the final years of his life as a local oddity, with locals leaving food on the riverbank for him. But one day, sadly, he was found washed up on the banks, having passed away. For over a decade, this image has circled the internet, claiming to be the only surviving image of the amphibious child. While it's uncertain whether this deformed child really is the frog boy of Baragdava, the image certainly fits the tale. Let's move on now with a question. How long could you hold your breath? A couple minutes, at absolute maximum, surely. Well, when a horrifying disaster struck in 2012, one man was left in pitch blackness alone at the bottom of the sea with no air for 30 freaking minutes. Could anyone possibly survive this? Well, let's find out what his colleagues were met with when they retrieved him. The man in question was Chris Lemons, a deep-sea saturation diver whose job involved constructing and repairing undersea equipment. It's a serious, risky business, so saturation divers live in a pressurized chamber for extended periods before they dive, allowing their bodies to acclimatize. When it's time to work, the divers climb inside a smaller, equally pressurized chamber called a bell, which descends deep into the ocean worksite. After underwater work is completed, divers return to the bell, which brings them back to the pressurized chamber on the ship. Once the working, which usually lasts several weeks, is over, they are slowly, carefully decompressed over several days. With this kind of deep-sea work, there are naturally many hazards. One of the biggest is maintaining air supply through the diver's umbilical cord. This long, sturdy cord supplies heat, oxygen, contact with the ship, and any other necessities for survival. Decompression sickness, or the bends, is another risk, and occurs when divers return to lower pressure levels too quickly. In these situations, dissolved nitrogen in the blood attempts to exit the body extremely quickly, which can result in bubbles forming in the blood, causing headaches, joint pain, and even paralysis and death. Because of this risk, saturation diving is designed to ensure decompression occurs as slowly as possible. Knowing all the dangers didn't stop Chris Lemons heading out for a dive on December 18, 2012. Like most divers, he loved his job. For him, the unique experience far outweighed the risks. That fateful day, Chris and his team had been working for a while when surface weather suddenly shifted for the worse. The support boat's navigational systems failed, meaning it couldn't hold its position for the divers. The massive ship started drifting away, and the divers were told to return to the bell as quickly as possible. On the attempted return, disaster struck. Chris's co-diver, Dave, was carried off with the ship. Chris's umbilical got snagged on the metal structure they were working on, trapping him. The pulling force of the 8 8,000-ton boat snapped his umbilical, and he dropped to the seafloor in pitch blackness. While everyone above Chris desperately tried to return to him, Chris made use of his 2 air bottles, known as bailouts. Altogether, they only contained 5 minutes of air. Thinking quickly in the impenetrable darkness, Chris located the structure he'd been working on and climbed to the top, where rescue would be most likely. But by the time he was at the top, his air supply was almost gone. Chris had no choice but to lay there and await rescue, 300 feet underwater, breathing becoming harder by the second. Moments later, he lost consciousness. Up at the surface, after frantically restarting the boat's computers, the navigational system came back online, allowing the boat to return to Chris. 30 minutes later, Chris's co-diver hastily dragged Chris back to the Bell, where another colleague set to work on reviving Chris with CPR. Given that oxygen is vital for brain function and bodily processes in general, the average person can only live a few minutes without it. Yet, a half an hour after Chris ran out of oxygen, by some miracle, he reanimated with a deep breath. When a medic on the ship finally tended to Chris, he was shocked to find that despite being exhausted and cold, he was fine. He'd suffered no brain damage nor any other issues associated with lack of oxygen. But how is this possible? One possibility might have been that Chris's body and brain cooling in the water of the North Sea, which was likely below 37 degrees Fahrenheit. A person's metabolic rate, or how much energy their body uses, decreases at lower temperatures. So, a cooled down brain can survive longer without oxygen. A reaction known as the diver's reflex may also have helped Chris. Usually triggered by diving into cold water, the reflex slows down a person's heart rate, allowing their respiration system to conserve energy. One of the most important factors allowing Chris's survival were his emergency bailouts. With higher oxygen content than regular air, the bailouts saturated Chris's tissues with oxygen. What's more, during saturation dives, red blood cell production is significantly reduced in divers, which means that oxygen is transported more slowly. This would ultimately lengthen the amount of time a diver can survive on minimal oxygen, or even without oxygen. But all these factors would have been for nothing if it weren't for Chris's calm, clear-cut actions to facilitate his rescue. Thanks to a combination of quick thinking and the peculiar biological quirks of saturation diving, Chris was able to achieve the seemingly impossible, securing him a place as a living, still breathing miracle. Let's check out a dive of a very different kind now. In June 2017, police officers on patrol in Dixon, Illinois, witnessed a car run a red light into traffic at a busy junction. Unlike what you might expect from someone ignoring traffic lights, the officer's dash cam showed the car moving oddly slowly. Clearly, something wasn't quite right. As the rogue blue car continued forward, another driver exited their vehicle and did this. As the baffled policeman got out to investigate, all became clear. It turned out the driver of the blue car had been having a seizure, leaving them unable to control their car. By chance, a driver coming the other way by the name of Randy Tompkins noticed the medical emergency taking place and immediately hopped into hero mode. Leaping through the window, he slammed on the handbrake and ensured the driver didn't hurt himself or anyone else. Randy learned what to do in a situation like this after being involved in a remarkably similar scenario years earlier. An elderly lady having a seizure collided with his car when he was just 16, and he was frustrated that he couldn't spot the signs to avoid crashing or help her. Since that day, he took it upon himself to ensure he was always prepared if he ever encountered a similar scenario. While the chances of something similar happening to him were remarkably slim, his preparation ultimately paid off when his moment did arrive. It's like a superhero origin story, albeit a superhero with a very specific set of powers. Sticking with the theme of unbelievable heroism, in 2018, a 22-year-old Malian migrant living in Paris named Mahmoud Gassama risked his life to save a child without a second's hesitation. The 4-year-old had been left home alone while his father went shopping, during which time the toddler found his way onto the balcony, ended up climbing over the protective railing, and was left clinging on for dear life. This is where Mahmoud came in. Spotting the dangling child, he immediately began to scale the building, and his ascent was captured by a bystander. In a true display of heroism, Mahmoud risked falling from a great height to save the child and was gloriously successful. His deeds didn't go unnoticed either. In a matter of days, he'd received not only a personal thanks from French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron.
That is amazing. And you, my friend, are a true hero.
But also a full French citizenship. On top of that, he was offered a job in the Paris Fire Brigade, which he gladly accepted. Now let's move on to something far less heartwarming. Dolly Oesterreich was a Milwaukee housewife with unmistakable charm, an insatiable appetite, and a very disturbing secret hidden in her attic. Dolly was born in the 1880s and grew up a German immigrant on a poor Midwestern farm. In her early 20s, she married her first husband, Fred Oesterreich, a hard-living, wealthy factory owner. Fred worked long, tiresome hours, and when he was home, he'd hit the bottle. Meanwhile, Dolly had needs, and her husband was usually far too drunk or busy to meet them. In 1913, when Dolly was 33, she phoned Fred to tell him that her sewing machine had stopped working. Fred promised to send a repairman over that same afternoon. Enter Otto Sanhuber, who worked as a repairman at Fred's factory. When Otto arrived at the Oesterreich household, Dolly greeted him wearing nothing but a silk nightgown, stockings, and a spritz of her best perfume.
Oh my God! Wow!
I'm sure you can guess what happened next. The two began a lurid affair behind Fred's back, but neighbors soon picked up on their increasingly frequent trysts. Dolly decided to throw people off the scent with an absolutely crazy idea. Otto should quit his job at the factory and move into the Oesterreich's attic. Otto was so love-struck that he agreed to sacrifice all interaction with the outside world just to steal some valuable moments with Dolly while her husband was out at work. Dolly put a padlock on the attic and kept the key to herself, telling Fred she wanted a safe place to store her furs. Otto spent his days concocting bathtub gin and making love to Dolly, and his nights by candlelight, writing pulp fiction stories of adventure and lust he hoped to have published someday. He was fed scraps from the kitchen brought up by Dolly, and earned his keep by carrying out household chores. Dolly and Otto's arrangement continued this way for 5 years, during which time Fred heard inexplicable noises and lost a few personal items, but ultimately never suspected a thing, until in 1918, Fred told Dolly that they were moving to Los Angeles. Dolly agreed on one condition: the new house needed an attic. When move day came, Dolly sent Otto Sanhuber ahead of them. By the time the Oesterreichs arrived, now 22-year-old Otto had already set up home in the new loft space. In case you're wondering how cramped it was, here's another later tenant, Mrs. Nels Burgo, giving a little tour of Otto's private nest. In LA, Fred and Dolly's relationship started to deteriorate as Fred's drinking worsened. On the evening of August 22, 1922, a violent row broke out between the couple. Overhearing the argument and fearing for Dolly's life, Otto rushed downstairs brandishing two .22 caliber pistols. Fred, baffled to find himself staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by his ex-colleague, quickly flew into a rage. The ensuing struggle wasn't pretty, and by the end of it, Fred was no more. The illicit lovers had to think fast, so they hatched yet another scheme to cover their tracks. Otto grabbed Fred's diamond-studded watch and locked Dolly in the closet. Then, once Otto had climbed back into his attic hideaway, Dolly began screaming until one of the neighbors arrived and called the cops. Although the police had their suspicions about the scene, they had no reason to doubt Dolly's story. She'd been robbed by a man who made short work of her husband and made off with his diamond watch. Fast forward a few months, and having inherited Fred's fortune, Dolly bought herself a brand new house. And although they finally had the opportunity to bring their relationship out into the open, for reasons that remain a mystery to this day, Otto once again stowed himself away in the attic. Meanwhile, Dolly wasn't satisfied with just one man in her life and began a new relationship with her estate attorney, Herman S. Shapiro. After a series of further trysts where Dolly gradually slipped up and spilled the beans about her crimes, the law caught up with her. Despite her and Otto getting away with it for a couple of decades and ultimately parting ways, eventually they were both tracked down. However, due to evidence-based complications, hung juries, and the statute of limitations, the pair ultimately, unbelievably, walked free and never served sentences.
What? What the?
Let's move on to an unbelievable tale involving some slightly more virtuous folks now. Throughout the 1950s at the Westside Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska, choir practice on Wednesdays always kicked off strictly at 7:20 p.m. This was no different on the 1st of March, 1950, when Reverend Walter Klempel arrived in the afternoon to prepare the church. He lit the furnace, seeing as the evenings were chilly that time of year, and returned home for dinner. At 7:10 p.m., just as he was about to leave for choir practice with his family, they were held up when his daughter spilled food on her dress. As she got changed, a frustrated Reverend Walter watched as 7:20 came and went, and they became officially late. Little did he know that his daughter's delay would end up saving their lives. At 7:25, a boom echoed across the town as the Westside Baptist Church suddenly exploded. Its walls fell outward, and the heavy wooden roof crashed to the ground. People across town rushed to the scene, including Reverend Walter. By the time he arrived, the fire brigade had already tamed the flames and searched the rubble for bodies. That's when one lucky coincidence took on a whole new level of strange. According to the firemen, the explosion was caused by a gas leak near the furnace, meaning the church could easily have blown up when Reverend Walter was there in the afternoon. But that's not all. At the time of the explosion, the church had been empty, which was highly peculiar, seeing as choir practice should have already been in session. Where were the other choir members? Had the firemen missed them in their search? Well, as it turned out, every one of the 15 members ended up being late, and all for completely different reasons. Car trouble delayed 2 women, while others paused to complete homework, finish a letter, and hear the end of their favorite radio show. The church pianist took a nap after dinner, completely overslept, and her mother, the choir director, couldn't leave without her. Seeing as there were no cell phones in the 1950s to shoot each other a text, there was no way for any of them to know others were also having trouble. But thanks to what you might call a genuine miracle, each member of the choir survived completely unscathed. And I'll bet that gave them something to sing about. For the guy in the unbelievable story up next, by contrast, singing was the last thing on his mind. In 2012, 75-year-old Ron Svedin from Brewster, Massachusetts, had a non-stop cough, shortness of breath, and seriously lacked energy, and things seemed to be getting worse. But when doctors took x-rays of his chest, they realized that something seriously puzzling was going on. Despite x-rays revealing a grainy spot on Ron's left lung, doctors were unable to find any evidence of cancer or other diseases, which a blemish like that would usually indicate. When sample tissue from Ron's lungs came back from the laboratory, doctors were shocked to find traces of plant matter in the specimen. And no, a member of the medical staff didn't drop their salad in the sample. As doctors carried out further tests, a truly jaw-dropping realization dawned on them. All those months Ron had been coughing and wheezing, he'd been walking around with a pea plant growing in his left lung. Now I know what you're thinking. How's that even possible? Well, when a pea germinates, it'll grow until it breaks the surface of the ground. But because it couldn't break out of Ron's body, the half-an-inch sized sprout just sat there, causing him a world of trouble. Though the real question was how it came to be in Ron's lung in the first place. Most likely, Ron had been eating too fast and the pea slipped down his windpipe instead of his esophagus. As his choking reflexes failed to clear the pea from his windpipe, it ended up in his lung, where it eventually sprouted. And unfortunately, doctors weren't able to retrieve it the way it went down, and Ron had to be operated on to get his pea plant parasite removed. This did nothing to thwart his sense of humor, though. After the successful procedure, when nurses placed a big plate of peas in front of him, he merely laughed and gobbled them up. On to another senior with a truly perplexing tale now. In March 2020, Ruth Bryant was celebrating her 100th birthday at her assisted living community in North Carolina when 2 sheriff's deputies entered the lounge in search of her. They approached her as she was seated with her family, whipped out a pair of handcuffs, and moved in to arrest her. Now, you might be thinking, did she rob a bank, or was she guilty of some unspeakably twisted crimes long ago that had finally been found out? The answer was even more shocking. Ruth, to everyone's everyone's astonishment, was being arrested for indecent exposure. She didn't even try to deny it. She did, however, make a big hubbub when the deputies cuffed her to her walker, even telling one of them that she was getting on her nerves. But that's not all. As they loaded Ruth into a police cruiser, she fought back, kicking one of the officers in the knee. Now, Ruth's tough temperament left her daughter horrified as she watched her mother being driven to the station. When they finally arrived, the deputies wasted no time in sitting Ruth down for a mugshot. One phone call and an orange jumpsuit later, Ruth's daughter arrived at the station expecting to find her frail old mother wallowing in a cell. Instead, the scene was even more shocking than she imagined. Not only was Ruth not in distress, she wasn't even locked up. Instead, the entire station buzzed with laughter. As it turns out, the arrest was all one big gag that Ruth personally organized for her own birthday. In an entire century's time, she'd never been in trouble with the law, and as one of her bucket list items, she wanted to tick it off. With the joke having run its course, Ruth was soon back at the retirement home, spending the rest of her birthday surrounded by friends, family, and a brand new criminal record. If you enjoyed this video, check out this other one about urban mysteries nobody can solve. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.